Welcome back, everyone, to another week of Ramban on Torah. I hope everybody had a wonderful Yom Ha'atzmaut, a meaningful Yom HaZikaron. And now we're back to the Parsha, and we're back to the Ramban. As usual, I like to do 4 Rambans today. 2 are sort of just interesting observations. One is the Ramban on the Moados, which we could spend all year on. There are fantastic Rambans on Parsha Moados, which is what we read every one of the Shalosh Regalim about the various holidays. And then one on, again, just an observation on Sefirat Haomer, since it's in the Parsha and we're in the middle of Sefirat Haomer. Let's start in the middle of, it's kind of the beginning of the Parsha. It's Perek Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Yud Zayin. And the Ramban notices something about how the Torah sets up a Pasuk, which allows him to make a point, which I think just as students of the Ramban, we have to notice. It says the Pasuk, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, daber al Aharon lemor, ish mizar acha ledorotam asher yihiyeh vo mum, lo yikrav lahakriv lachem Elohav. Okay, a person who has a mum can't do the avoda. And the Ramban notices that the introduction to the Parsha is different than our usual ones, right? For example, the Parsha of Emor, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Emor la Kohanim b'nei Aharon. What's Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor daber el Aharon? What's Aharon? So says the Ramban, Lo amar bekan daber el Aharon ve'el banav, ka'asher yomar beparshiot kulan. It doesn't say that Aaron should tell his children, tell Aaron and his children, Vatam, Ki sham tziva beparshiot hakarbanot zot Torah ta'olah v'zot Torah ta'chatat v'ha'asham ukiyot bazeh. Right? That's the normal introduction if you have to teach the Kohanim what to do for karbanos. Aval bekan im omar daber al Aharon ve'el banav ro'ui sheyomar ish mikem l'dorotechem. If it says Aaron and his children, then the next part would be, okay, if something happens to one of you. V'lo yirtzeh lehazhiret Aharon atzmo b'torat hamumin. But says the Ramban, the Torah doesn't want to tell Aaron specifically what the din is if he gets a mum. Ki Aharon kiddush Hashem kulo yafeh umum lo yihiyeh bo. Says the Ramban, Aaron HaKohen can't get a mum. It's not possible. He's Aaron HaKohen. He's the holiest of the holies. Just to point out, the Ramban loves Aaron HaKohen, right? Normally we think, the narrative sections of the Torah, and then there's the halacha, and they don't meet. But the Ramban is reminded, who's HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking about? He's talking about Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen can't get a mum. Aval yazhirenu al zaro. Sheyuram v'yazhir otam l'dorotam. He has to warn him about his children. Ubeparshat hatuma b'samuch daber al Aharon ve'el banav v'yinazru mikadshei b'nei Yisrael. Says the Ramban, you can't miss it. The next parsha is daber al Aharon ve'el banav. What's the difference about that parsha? He says, ki tachein shegam ba'Aharon eirat tumat hamaga b'meit ubasheretz. It could be that Aaron's walking down the street and a dead body, he bumps into a dead body, he becomes tameh. So you have to warn Aaron about that. But when the Torah goes back to describe leprosy or tzarat and zav, chazar v'omar ish mizera Aharon, ki lo ye'era ze bigufo, ki malach Hashem tzvakotu. Right? The Ramban is not really given to exaggeration. The Ramban points out, none of these things, Aaron can't become a tsaruah. Aaron can't become a zav. Aaron can't get a mum. He's kiddush Hashem. He's a malach Hashem tzvakot. Now again, not for now. A longer discussion is why the Ramban loves Aaron HaKohen so much. Why not Moshe Rabbeinu? Why not other people? But the fact is, here, the Ramban uses his love for Aaron HaKohen, which he takes as a given, to understand why the Torah sometimes just says daber al Aharon, and sometimes says daber al Aharon ve'el banav, and the different types of phrasing. And says the Torah, when it says daber al Aharon, it's because he's going to tell his children. But when it says daber al Aaron ve'el banav, it implies that it could happen to Aaron, and tumos hayotse migufan and mumim and things like that can't happen to Aaron. Because he's kiddush Hashem, he's a malach Hashem tzvakos. Okay, let's leave it at that. Next, let's go to Perek Chaf Bet. It's the next Perek. There, you have sort of a whole discussion about Tum and Tara and things like that. And then you have something strange. Vaidaber Hashem el Moshe. I'm sorry. Then you have something strange. At the end of that parsha, you have sort of just general psukim. It finishes Bayomahu ye'achel v'lo totir mimenu ad boker ani Hashem, and then Ushmartem mitzvotai va'asitem otam ani Hashem. V'lo tichalu et shem kachi v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael ani Hashem b'kadishchem ha'motzi etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lochem le'Elohim ani Adonai. So you could look in the Ramban yourself at the end of that piece and see the discussion he has about whether these psukim are an end to the specific part or a general statement. Right? We have general statements in the Torah, Ushmartem et mitzvotai, things that the Rambam would say, for example, that it's not a lo taseh because it's a general, inspiration for us. It's pushing us to keep the Torah. So the Ramban has that discussion. But then he says, V'tam v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. Al dat rabotenu mitzvat aseh. There is a mitzvat aseh shenikadesh et shemo b'mitzvot lehareg alehem v'lo la'avor. Says the Ramban, everybody knows there's a mitzvah of kiddush Hashem, and in its narrowest form, the mitzvah of kiddush Hashem is to allow myself to be killed rather than violate the Torah. Now, we know, and the Ramban certainly knows, that mitzvah is limited to avodah zarah, shvichus damim, and gilui arayos, right? What we know as is the big three. But nevertheless, the Ramban discusses it here as if it's not limited that way. V'zeh ta'am hamotzi etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim, shehu ta'am yichlol Kol ha-mitzvot shera'ui likadesh shemo alehem ba'avur she'anachnu avodav asher ga'alanu mi-Mitzrayim. Now, I didn't see this anyplace, and so I can't be sure that it's true. But my sense is that the Ramban is saying, really, we should have a din of Yeharg Val Yavor for every mitzvah Torah. Why? HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu owns us. And if somebody tells me not to wear shatnez, or to wear shatnez, I should give up my life. Right? But the Ramban knows that's not the halacha. But I think he's saying, you read the psukim as if in theory that were the case. When the Gemara says that nimnu v'gamru ba'aliyah b'beit nitzah, where they all got together during the Roman persecutions, and they made a halacha that you have to be Yeharg Val Yavor for these three things, I often ask myself, at the time, was that a chumrah or was that a kula? Meaning, were Bnei Yisrael being moser nefesh for everything, and Chazal got together and said, no, that's not going to work. You should only be moser nefesh for the big three? Or were Bnei Yisrael not moser nefesh for anything? They were saying that, v'chai bahem v'lo sheyamus bahem. And Chazal said, maybe that's true generally, but with respect to the big three, avodah zarah, gilui arayos, and shvichus damim, you have to give up your life. Right? That's kind of an interesting discussion. My feeling in the Ramban is that people were giving up their lives for everything. That's the simple pshat. V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. God took me out of Eretz Mitzrayim. God hamotzi etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. God owns me, and therefore I should give up my life for everything. L'maisa, Chazal limited that to the big three. But at least in theory, our approach should be that we would give up our lives for everything. Okay, and again, that would be, I think the Ramban would say, if you don't give your life for something, then what's left? At least like in theory, there's big three, right? L'maisa, we don't come across it a lot. Nobody comes up to me and says, worship avodah zarah, I'm going to kill you. But philosophically, it makes a difference. I'd like to believe that I'd give up my wife for my life, for my wife, for my children, maybe for everybody, for Klal Yisrael. I'd like to believe that. And there need to be examples in which I actually have an opportunity to do that. And so the Ramban here says, in theory, v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, I should give up my life for every mitzvah. L'maisa, I don't. Okay, now, none of that is in the Ramban, so, everybody has to sort it through on their own. But the Ramban couldn't mean every mitzvah. That's not what the Gemara says. That's not how we paskin, and that's not something that I don't think the Ramban could defend that, and I don't think the Ramban would want to defend that. Okay, now, we go to the Parshas HaMoados. The Parshas HaMoados, it's one of the most popular and well-known prakim in the Torah, because we read it, Sukkos, Pesach, Shavuos. Do we read it on Shavuos? In Israel, we don't, because there's only one day and we read the Aseret HaDibros. I think in Chutz La'aretz, we read the second day of Yom Tov. Okay, let's start reading. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe Emor. Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem moadei Adonai asher tikru otam mikra'i kodesh eilehem moadai. Now, interestingly, what are the Yom Tovim? Sheishet Yamim te'asem melacha uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat Shabbaton mikra kodesh kol melacha lo ta'asu Shabbati l'Adonai b'chol moshvotechem. So is Shabbos one of the Moadim or not? What's going on? Second of all, what's it doing in Parshas Vayikra? Third of all, what's Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Emor? What happened to the Kohanim? So says the Ramban, in the very beginning of a long Ramban, we'll just do pieces of it. Daber b'nei Yisrael, ein la Kohanim esek bi'inyan hamoadot yoter me'asher liYisrael bohem. Right? The fact of the matter is, Kohanim don't own the Moados. They don't own the Yom Tovim. All of Klal Yisrael. The Ramban says they have no claim to the Moadot more than the rest of us. Al Kain lo hizhir ber parsha zot Aharon uvanav rak b'nei Yisrael sheyichlol et kulam ka'achad. Right? Again, just a close reading of the parshas of the psukim for the Ramban is, it doesn't say Vayidaber Hashem, El Moshe Emor la Kohanim b'nei Aharon. None of that. It just says to tell Klal Yisrael. And the Ramban says that's because Klal Yisrael has the same chelek in the Moadot as do Aaron and his children. Sheyichlol et kulam ke'achad. All of us should be included. Now he has an application of this. Ki lo yifaresh karbonot hamusafim beparsha azot. There are no karbonot musafim. For that, we're going to have to wait for Parshas Pinchas, another well-known parsha in the Torah. That's where all the karbonos come in. Aval hizkir hamoadim kan b'torat kohanim. So then what's it doing in Vayikra? Right? If it's not Emor la kohanim b'nei Aharon, if it's not limited, so what's it doing in Torah's kohanim? So he says, no. Ba'avur shehem yimek hakarbonot v'yirmoz alehem. Obviously, we bring special karbonot on the regalim. So the Torah hints to that. Kimo shama v'yikraftem mishel Hashem. V'omar b'sof ha'parsha eile moadei Hashem asher tikru otam mikra'i kodesh lahakriv yishel Hashem olahu mincha zevach u'nisachim dvayom b'yamo. Aval lo ha'erich leva'er hamusafim shelo ratza she'inhagu lahem bamidbar. Says the Ramban Kiddush. He says all the karbonot musafim that are listed in Parshas Pinchas were not done during the 40 years in the Midbar. And the Ramban explains further on, that's a machlokes in the Gemara, but the Ramban stakes a position that that's the case. So again, what are the Moadot doing in Sefer Vayikra? So he says, the fact is, there are special karbanos. You're going to read about it later. And they're referenced in this parsha. So that's enough of a connection to the Kohanim that this parsha is in Torat Kohanim. But in fact, the focus of Parshas HaMoados here is not at all on the karbanos, right? Sukkos, you have to sit in a sukkah and you have to take a lulav, and Pesach, you have to eat matzah. Right? It's not focused on the karbanot, and shockingly, the Ramban says the karbanot hamusafim were not brought in the midbar. Okay, That's the first point here in the Ramban. Second point, and this I think is really, really important in terms of how the Ramban reads the Psukim. The Ramban, of course, is a close reader. And as we read at the beginning, the Torah starts, Daber b'nei Sova martelem moadei Hashem shetikru otam mikra kodesh elehem moadai, and immediately Shabbos, Sheshet Yamim Te'asem Malacha, and then it goes back to another introduction to the Parshas HaMoados. Eile moadei Adonai mikra kodesh asher tikru otam b'moadam, b'chodesh harishon ba'arba'asar yom lachodesh, right? Pesach, etc. So what's going on in these introductory psukim? First of all, is Shabbos one of the Moados? And if it is, that's great. Why is it not listed as regular one of the Moados? It's kind of thrown in the intro, and then the Torah ki'ilu, as if it was interrupted, starts again. Eila moadei Hashem yikra kodesh asher tikru otam b'moadam. So says the Ramban. He has a number of suggestions, but he says v'hanachon be'enai. It's probably 10 lines from where we left off before. V'hanachon be'enai. Ki perush moadei Hashem asher tikru otam mikra'ei kodesh eilehem moadai al hanizkarim lemata b'parshiot. Says the Ramban, when the Torah starts, Daber b'nei Sova martelem moadei Hashem asher tikru otam moadai, it's not referring to Shabbos. It's referring to Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkos and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's referring to the whole parak that follows. V'lachein chazar sham pa'am acheret eile moadei Hashem. So therefore, after Shabbos, you need another introduction to the parsha, and it's its own paragraph in the Torah. Eile moadei Hashem asher tikru otam. I'm sorry. Eile moadei Adonai mikra kodesh asher tikru otam b'moadam. Now why? Ba'avur shehifsik b'inyan Shabbat. Says the Ramban, the way you read the psukim, even though it's problematic, and it's probably not the way it should be written, the way you read the psukim are, here comes the Moados, Shabbos interrupts, and therefore I have to reintroduce the Moadot again. Now why would that be? Why would the Torah lechatchila put Shabbos in if it's an interruption? V'hinei. Omar moadei Hashem asher tikru otam mikra'ei kodesh eilehem moadai b'melechet avodah. Meaning, what's prohibited on the Yomim Tovim? Melechet avodah. Not all melacha. This is a unique limud of the Ramban. Melechet avodah is asur. What's excluded from that? Ochel nefesh. Aval haShabbat tishmeru la'asot ota Shabbat Shabbaton mikol melacha shebe'olam. Not just melechet avodah, all melachas asur on Shabbos, which includes, of course, ochel nefesh. Ki yazhir b'Shabbat pamim rabot. The Torah warns us to keep Shabbos many, many, many times. V'yirmoz od b'kan ki gam b'vo'o ba'achat min hamoadim lo tidche la'asot ba ochel nefesh. Says the Ramban, if Pesach falls out on Shabbos, the heter of ochel nefesh doesn't apply because it's Shabbos. V'kamo, and says the Ramban, is similarly situated, a similar idea in the Torah. Eile hadvarim asher tziva Hashem la'asot otam al hamishkan v'kelav asher yazkir b'parsha hashniya hivsik b'Shabbat sheishish yamim te'asem malacha v'chazar v'amar zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem kechu meitchem teruma. Says the Ramban, this isn't the only place the Torah does it, and it's a fascinating idea in the Ramban. Says the Ramban, sometimes the Torah starts something. Vayakel Moshe et kol hadat b'nei Yisrael. We're at the beginning of Parshas Vayakel. Vayomor alehem eile hadivarim asher tziva Hashem la'asot otam. What are the divarim? The Ramban says the Mishkan. Next pasuk. Sheishet yamim te'aseh melacha vayom hashvi yelachem kodesh Shabbat Shabbaton l'Hashem kol ha'oseh bo melacha yumat. Okay, then Vayomer Moshe kol hadat bnei Yisrael lemor zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem lemor. Then the Torah reintroduces. So the Ramban says the literary device by which the Torah teaches you an important halacha is interruption. First, the Torah says, I'm about to tell you how to build a Mishkan. Then the Torah interrupts that flow by introducing Shabbos, by telling us, Sheish Yamim Te'aseh Malacha, and then the Torah has to go back and reintroduce the Mishkan. Why? So most people would say, Smichos HaParshios. This says the Mishkan, then it has Shabbos. The Smichos HaParshios teaches us that the Mishkan is not Docha Shabbos, and it's also to build the Mishkan on Shabbos. The Ramban agrees, of course it's also to build the Mishkan on Shabbos, but not because of Smichos HaParshios. Because the Torah literally interrupts the building of the Mishkan with the halacha of Shabbos to teach you that you can't do Meleches HaMishkan on Shabbos. Similarly, in Parshas HaMoados, says the Ramban, the Torah literally interrupts the description of the Moadot to tell you about Shabbos, so that you'll know that even though with respect to the Moados, Ochel Nefesh is mutter, I can cook on Yom Tov, that's not going to apply on Shabbos. Okay, and so the Ramban finishes by saying, V'hi ha-mitzvah ha-rishona ba'avur shivsik ba hutzrach lachzor latchil ba-rishona. And then the Torah has to come back and introduce the Moadot because it interrupted with Shabbos. I think, again, as a literary device, it's a fantastic idea. Now, let's skip almost to the end. And the Ramban has a new idea. And this is a big, big discussion in the Rambam, in the Monei HaMitzvos. V'ta'am mikra'ei kodesh. What does it mean, says the Ramban, that the Yomim Tovim are called mikra'ei kodesh? Sheyihiyu biyom hazeh kulam kiruim v'ne'esafim lekadeshoto. It demands of us. Mikra kodesh, you might think, okay, Bezdin establishes the Yom Tov, which is true. But says Ramban, no, we're mikra, a holy convocation. We're called to do something. What are we called to do? Kruim v'ne'esafim kruim v'ne'esafim lekadeshoto. Ki mitzvahi al Yisrael, and the Ramban has specifics now. Lihi kavetz b'veit ha'elokim biyom moed lekadesh hayom. We are commanded to gather. Obviously, Beit Elokim is the Beis Hamikdash, but nowadays that would be replaced by Beit Knesset, by a shul. We're obligated lekadesh hayom b'farhesia, in public. How? B'tfilah v'halel, with davening and halel. V'halel lakel b'ksut nikiyah v'la'asot oto yom mishteh. Says the Ramban, there are 4 ways that we're commanded to make it Yom Tov. First of all, we have to gather together publicly and daven and say Hallel, right? That's a big machlokas in the Rishon. The Rambam makes it clear. Hallel can't possibly be a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Ramban seems to support the Bahag in this, that Hallel is. V'haraya, he has it right here in the Parsha. We have to make it Yom Tov b'tfilah v'Hallel. On top of that, we have to wear ksut nikiyah, new, clean, beautiful clothing, and make it a Yom Mishteh. Kimoshe Nemar b'Kabbalah, the pasuk in Nehemiah. L'chu, talking about Rosh Hashanah, not talking about Purim. L'chu ichlu mashmanim ushtu mamtakim v'shilchu manot la'ein nachon lo ki kadosh hayom ladonenu va'al te'atzvu ki chedvat Hashem hima'uzchem. Right? When the Golei Bavel came back to Eretz Yisrael, not a lot of them, and Nehemiah made a speech to them and told them halacha, and they recognized that they were intermarried, they done all these wrong things, they were depressed. And so to cheer them up, he says to them, L'chu ichlu mashlim shtu mamtakim v'shilchu manot la'ein nachon lo, right? Do all these things because God wants you to be happy on Yom Tov. And so the Ramban has, I guess if you had to split it up, certain things that are spiritual, davening, hallel, gathering together b'farhesia, that seems to be spiritual. Then you have ksut nikiyah, and Yom Mishteh. You would think like those things seem inconsistent, right? Especially with the Ramban that we did last week on Kiddushim Tiyu and Novel B'Shus Torah, you would think the way to make it Yom Tov is to fast. If I want to make it a spiritually important day for me, I should fast. The Ramban says, no. It's a balance. It's Chatzi Lashem, Chatzi Lachem. There's different balances. But you need to be happy. And human beings are happy when they wear beautiful clothing. And human beings are happy when they eat. V'hinei mikra kodesh milashon kruei ha'ida, acharei ken yochlu ha'kruim. That's what it means, kruim. V'chein al kol machon hartzion v'al mikraeha. Ha'mekomot shenikrum sham yitkabtzu bahem kiruei ha'ida. That's what we should get together. And just skip to the very end. V'rabotenu zal amru, our aim b'ma'achal u'v'mishteh u'biksut nikia. Kilomar, shelo yehei chukam etzlecha kichog shar hayamim. It's not supposed to be a regular day. It's certainly not supposed to be a fast day. Aval ta'aseh lahem mikra shel kodesh lishanotam b'ma'achal u'b'malbush michol lekodesh. Says the Ramban, the way that you show, and again here, we're literally making it Yom Tov. The way that you show that it's Yom Tov is gathering in shul and then coming home and having a beautiful meal. A fatty meal, a great meal. That's how you make it Yom Tov. I wish we had more time to sort of flesh out this point, but I'm just making this point, that the Ramban, on the one hand, has Kiddushim Tiyu and Novel B'Shus Torah, and don't overdo it. But on the other hand, the Ramban has the requirement that making it a moed is both a spiritual and a physical fact, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do both. And that the Torah has a nuanced approach to this. It's true, getting drunk is an abomination, and being a glutton is an abomination. But doing it properly, and doing it l'shem shamayim, the Ramban has faith in us, and the Ramban has trust in us, and the Ramban thinks that both things are necessary. Okay, very, very last point. Sefirat Haomer. Now it happens to be that this is in a Kabbalistic section of the Ramban, which we usually skip, but I can't skip this one. Because nowadays, if you ask somebody, what's the feeling you're supposed to have during Sefirat Haomer, they would tell you, oh, sad. It's a feeling, it's a time of Avelus. The Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva were killed, all of which is true. But the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva were killed, during the revolution after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. They weren't killed in Chumash. They weren't killed in Tanakh. And so the Ramban has now, with respect to Shmini Atzeres, he has this little piece in the middle of a longer piece in the Ramban. V'hinei, hi Shmini Atzeret, ki shamna etzar hakol. Okay, whatever that means. V'tziva b'chag hamatzot shiva yamim b'kiddusha lifnem ul'achareihem ki kulam kiddushim. Says the Ramban, we're commanded in Pesach, okay, a week before and a week after, because we're all kiddushim. I know I have some idea, but what exactly that means literally, I don't know. Uv'tocham Hashem. U'maneh mimenu tishava arba'im yom shiva shavuot kimeolam. Count 7 weeks from Pesach, just like a week is creation of the world, so 7 creations of the world. V'kadesh yom shmini kishmini shel chag. Says the Ramban, we always thought there were shalosh regalim. Of course there are. But he says in this Kabbalistic way of looking at it, there are only 2 regalim. There's Sukkos, which is 7 days, and the 8th day is Shmini Atzeres, and there's Pesach, which is 7 days, and the 8th day is Shavuos. V'hayamim hasfurim beintayim, and the intermediary days between Pesach and Shavuos, kicholo shel moed bein harishon v'hashmini bechag. It's exactly like Chol HaMoed Sukkos. It's a joyous period. We're counting towards Matan Torah. We're counting towards the giving of the Torah. Yom Matan Torah, sheharam bo et isho agdolot v'rav shamu mitoch ha'esh. I'm not, God forbid, suggesting that people, get married during Sefirat. There are specific halachas, and we have to observe them. But I am suggesting that the feeling during Sefirat Haomer is not supposed to be one overwhelmingly of sadness. It's supposed to be an excitement as we count towards Matan Torah. It's supposed to be a feeling of improvement and self-improvement and growth. It's supposed to be a feeling, says the Ramban, of days like Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed, of course, are joyous days. Even Chol HaMoed Pesach, which is during Sefirat, are joyous days. And the Ramban's huge kiddush is that really there are two moadot, two regalim. There's the 7 days of Sukkos, followed by the 8th day, the day that everything ends, Shmini Atzeres. There are the 7 days of Pesach, followed by the intermediary days that are like Chol HaMoed, ending with the 8th day, the day of Shavuos. And it's just interesting to note that they're both called Atzeres, Shmini Atzeres, and in the Torah, Shavuos is called Atzeres. They both have no mitzvos, and in each of them, Chazal have inserted, Torah, right? Shmini Atzeres is, of course, Simchas Torah, and Atzeres, Shavuos, that we celebrate coming up, is obviously the day that Chazal have sort of put Matan Torah in. There's no place in the Torah, we believe the Torah was given on Vav Sivan. We believe that that's the time. But it's actually not literally in a pasuk. It's not explicitly in the Torah. It's just put there by Chazal, I think, for the two parallels and for this idea of the Ramban. Okay, a little bit overtime today. We saw the fact that the Ramban loves Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen can't get a mum. Aaron HaKohen, God forbid, can't be a zav. That's why the Torah changes the language at the beginning of the Parshiah. We saw this idea in the Ramban of kiddush Hashem, that really every mitzvah should be a kiddush Hashem, but it can't be. We saw a major Ramban on Parshas HaMoados, that Shabbos interrupts the flow to let you know that Ochal Nefesh is not mutter on Yom Tov. We saw this idea, the balance between the spiritual and the physical, that we are commanded, not just Bezdin. Bezdin establishes the Yom Tov, but then we have to come to shul, befarhesia, biksus nikia, with special ochel, saying Hallel, right? A whole discussion there in the Ramban about how we, Bnei Yisrael, make it a Yom Tov. And finally, we saw that Sefirat Haomer is fascinating. I think Sefirat Haomer is the Chol HaMoed between Pesach and Shavuos. Yashkach to everyone. Have a great, great Shabbos and see you next week.